Good morning. It is Friday the 13th, 2023, in October, of course. Doing the New York Times daily newsletter. David Leonhardt and Lauren Jackson are our propagandists today, covering the prospect of a ground invasion in Gaza, as well as the House Speaker race, Microsoft, and feminist art. Oh, that ought to be fun. Urban warfare. For years, Israeli officials have worried about the threat of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Still, they viewed a full ground invasion of Gaza to be too dangerous and costly to try. Many Israeli soldiers would die. The widespread killing of Palestinian civilians would damage Israel's global reputation. The invasion might fail to dismantle Hamas. So just to break down all of that stuff real quick. So the ground danger the invasion would be dangerous. Absolutely. Much worse now than it ever was before, because now drones change the battlefield so much. Tanks are now worthless. Those drones can take them out with relative ease. Israel would have been better to have gone into Gaza 5 years ago before they had those drones. Many Israeli soldiers will die. It's going to be bloody. They're going to lose a lot of, they're going to get a lot of taken hostage too. The widespread killing of Palestinian civilians, as far as damaging Israel's global reputation, no, it won't. They killed civilians en masse every single time this happens. It's usually 10 to 20 to 1. So for every Israeli that dies, 10 to 20 Palestinians die. So no, the world doesn't care. Israel is allowed to pretty much go carte blanche. As far as dismantling Hamas, it's not going to. There is no chance of that. Hamas has become an ideology. It is now beyond just the individuals that spawned it, which was spawned at the help of Israel to fracture the PLO. So you created this monster, and now this monster is roaming free. Last weekend's attacks by Hamas, killing more than 1,300 people, mostly civilians, have changed this calculation. Israel's leaders and many of its citizens seem to have decided they now have no choice but to invade, and the military has ordered more than 1 million people to evacuate northern Gaza. Israel's goals are to prevent Hamas from being able to conduct more attacks and reestablish the country's military credibility. But at the same time, the same challenges that kept Israel from invading Gaza before have not gone away. The war, as a result, has the potential to become another case study in strategic difficulties of urban warfare, as the U.S. experienced in Fallujah, Iraq, nearly 2 decades ago. Israel did in Lebanon during the 1980s, and Russia has in Ukraine. It's one of the most complicated fighting scenarios that you can have, Alex Plaitzas of the Atlantic Council told us. It makes for bloody, awful conflict. As opposed to non-urban combat that's not bloody and is not awful, you jerk. The Atlantic Council, always warmongers. In today's newsletter, we preview the invasion that appears to be coming, focusing on 2 questions. What is Israel trying to accomplish, and what is Hamas's strategy now? Well, Israel's trying to accomplish basically filling money for the military-industrial complex because they know they can't beat Hamas, and they don't really even want to because they need the boogeyman. And Hamas, their strategy is to let civilians die and get people to, and then blame Israel for it, which has worked effectively for the last 20 years. It's just going to be a stalemate. A lot of innocent people are going to die for nothing. Israel's goals. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's leader, has vowed to crush and destroy Hamas, which isn't going to happen. I mean, you might get a lot of them, but you're not going to destroy them. That's not going away. But many analysts expect that the group will continue to exist in some form for the foreseeable future. What then would qualify as a success for Israel? It would involve a Hamas that was so weak it could no longer govern Gaza, could no longer fire missiles into Israel, and could no longer launch terrorist attacks that look anything like last weekend's. To accomplish that, Israel is planning an invasion larger and longer than previous campaigns into Gaza since Israel ended its occupation there in 2005. Israel has mobilized 360,000 troops, more than 3% of its population, and cut off power, fuel, and water to Gaza. I've noticed that they did not mention that that's a war crime under international standards. The lack of resources has created dire problems for Gaza residents and will also make it harder for Hamas to operate. In the meantime, Israel will try and kill or arrest Hamas fighters, destroy its supply of major weapons like missiles, and close the tunnels where the group hides. But Gaza's densely populated streets will make that mission extremely difficult. Hamas fighters will be able to hide in alleys and buildings, and it will be difficult to distinguish from civilians. Civilian deaths, in turn, may damage Israel's international support. I doubt it. Hamas's leaders, as Tahani Mustafa, an analyst at the International Crisis Group, told us, we're definitely trying to draw Israel into a conflict. Thomas Friedman, the Times columnist, put it this way. What Israel's worst enemies, Hamas and Iran, want is for Israel to invade Gaza and get enmeshed in a strategic overreach there that would make America's entanglement in Fallujah look like a children's birthday party. We are talking house-to-house fighting that would undermine whatever sympathy Israel has garnered on the world stage, deflect world attention from the murderous regime in Tehran, and force Israel to stretch its forces permanently occupy Gaza and the West Bank. I like how they said the West Bank too, and just threw that in there. The West Bank is not governed by Hamas, so why would Israel need to occupy that too? The Israelis do have advantages, though. They probably have detailed computer images of every major building in Gaza, and they can use robots and drones to scout those buildings, find the Hamas defenders, and kill them. David Ignatius of the Washington Post noted, many of the terrorists who have kidnapped Israeli hostages were recorded on video, and it's a safe bet that every one of them will be a target for Israeli revenge. Hamas's defense. Some experts believe that Hamas's weekend attacks were more successful and deadlier than even Hamas's leaders expected. Either way, Hamas almost certainly understood that the attacks would provoke a large Israeli response and have prepared for it. In the past, urban warfare has helped insurgent groups beat back stronger militaries. In the first Battle of Fallujah in 2004, Iraqi militants were able to hold on to the city by fighting from a maze of buildings. Hamas militants will probably use a similar approach in Gaza. They will hide in booby-trapped homes and tunnels, ready to lob grenades at Israeli troops. They will also likely dress as civilians as they have in the past. Well, of course. It's almost inevitable that Israeli strikes on Hamas targets will hit or wound civilians, our colleague Stephen Erlanger, who has covered the Middle East for years, said on the Daily this week. And it's partly because Hamas deliberately lives among them and hides its munitions among them and in mosques and in hospitals. I've seen these things for myself, and I don't expect them to be any different this time. Finally, Hamas has the grim tactical advantage of holding at least 150 hostages. Israeli officials need to worry about the killing of these hostages with each attack. Hamas has also threatened to execute a hostage each time Israeli airstrike hits Gazans in their homes, which they have not done for the last 3 days. So to me, honestly, that was a bluff. It's because last time the Hamas had one single soldier, Gilead, I forget his last name, but they traded 1,000+ fighters, including the current leader of Hamas, was traded in an exchange for that one guy. So Hamas knows the value of an Israeli hostage. Among the few confident predictions experts make are that the coming invasion will be brutal and it will include major surprises. That a major operation is coming is hardly in doubt, the Times explains in a preview of the likely ground invasion. But there are technical arguments over how any operations should start, whether it will begin massively or with raiding parties, and how best to coordinate Israel's overwhelming strength in land, sea, and especially air power. After Israel ordered more than 1 million people in northern Gaza to leave, Gazan officials told Palestinians not to comply. And that's because Hamas wants dead bodies. Dead civilians make their cause. And half of the population of Gaza is children, and the mothers and fathers both say that their kids are born to be martyrs. Like, they want their kids to die. This is horrific, and it's going to be bloody. Israel and Hamas said Hamas was using Gaza City in the north for military operations. The UN said the evacuations would be impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences, which is correct. There's nowhere for them to go. Gaza's largest hospital in the north will not be evacuated. We have nowhere near to transport the patients to, the director said. Of course, where are they going to go? Gazans are panicked. Some fear they will permanently lose their homes. They're going to. Most of Gaza's population are refugees or the descendants of those who fled homes in present-day Israel in a 1948 war and were not allowed to return. Yep, and it's going to get worse. Strikes in Gaza. The Israeli military said it struck 750 targets overnight. And this is the day before they had dropped like 6,000 bombs, so they're really going hard here. Israel's retaliation has demolished entire neighborhoods, displacing hundreds of thousands of people. Medics are overwhelmed. And what's the how proportional of a response is this? I mean, you flatten huge swaths of this, killed far more. There's more dead now in Gaza than in Israel, but the standard is you got to kill at least 10 times the number of Palestinians for every Israeli. So we got a long way to go. 10,000 plus minimum is before Israel will even consider stopping. That's the norm. International response. U.S. and Qatar will block Iran, a Hamas ally, from obtaining $6 billion that was transferred to the nation in a recent deal to free American prisoners. I kind of feel like that's kind of a lie. They say that they haven't spent a single cent of that $6 billion. Really? So they got $6 billion a month ago, and they haven't spent anything, nothing. They just said, oh, you know what? We're just going to let that money sit. I don't believe that. That's a lie. An Israeli embassy employee was attacked in Beijing. Officials are investigating the motive. At least 3 Jewish schools in North London, home to Britain's largest Jewish community, closed over safety concerns. President Biden's face on billboards in Israel President Biden's face is on billboards in Israel that thank the U.S. for its support. Even some Republicans have praised Biden's response. Representative Steve Scalise withdrew his bid to become House Speaker after too many Republicans opposed him, leaving the chamber in chaos. Not in chaos. It's not chaos to not have a speaker. It's fine. They're allowed to do this. Jim Jordan, who finished second to Scalise in the nomination vote, and Patrick McHenry, the interim speaker, are possible alternate candidates. Let's see. More on politics. Federal prosecutors filed a new charge against Senator Robert Menendez, a New Jersey Democrat, accusing him of acting as a foreign agent for Egypt, which was known for a really long time, which means that this is some kind of a distraction. Wisconsin Republicans threatened to impeach a liberal state Supreme Court justice. Now they're backing down. Other stories. Microsoft is close to acquiring Activision Blizzard for $69 billion after a sign-off from British regulators. Oh, cool. Even more. Activision was its own thing, Blizzard was its own thing, and now it's just everything is consolidating and making crap. A jury convicted one officer and acquitted another in the death of Elijah McClain, an unarmed black man. A ring of fire solar eclipse will cross the sky this weekend. The best U.S. views will be along the path from Oregon to Texas, as this map shows. Let's see. Yeah, all right. That's going to be visible for me. I'll get to see that. Sweet. Okay. Only the international community can stop another devastating Israeli assault on Gaza. No, not really. After Hamas brutal terrorism, America's duty is to stand with Israel. No, it's not. We don't have to stand with anybody. Here's a column by Paul Krugman. Paul Krugman is a joke. Yesterday, he actually said that that we won the battle against inflation. No, we didn't. Steaks cost $15. Butter cost $8. Milk cost $5. No, inflation is higher than it's ever been. This is the worst economy ever. Paul Krugman, give back your Nobel Prize. Well, forget the Mickey tchotchkes. These superfans design their entire homes with Disney themes. That's just disturbing. All right. What do we got? History of Friday the 13th. Probably blocked. Let's see if we can. No. Okay. Today in history, one last time for this. All right, so the highlight on October 13th, 2010, rescuers in Chile using a missile-like escape capsule pulled 33 men one by one to fresh air and freedom 69 days after they were trapped in a collapsed mine a half a mile underground. In 1775, the United States Navy had its origins as the Continental Congress ordered the construction of a fleet. In 1792, the cornerstone of the Executive Mansion, later known as the White House, was laid by President George Washington during a ceremony in the District of Columbia. In 1932, President Herbert Hoover and Chief Justice Charles Evan Hughes laid the cornerstone for the U.S. Supreme Court building in Washington. In 1943, Italy declared war on Germany, its one-time Axis partner. In 1960, the Pittsburgh Pirates won the World Series, defeating the New York Yankees in Game 7, 10-9, with a home run hit by Bill Mazeroski. In 1972, a Ugandan chartered flight carrying 45 people crashed in the Andes. Survivors resorted to feeding off the remains of some of the deads in order to stay alive until they were rescued more than 2 months later. In 1974, longtime television host Ed Sullivan died in New York City at the age of 73. In 1999, in Boulder, Colorado, the John Benet Ramsey grand jury was dismissed after 13 months of work with prosecutors saying there wasn't enough evidence to charge anyone in the 6-year-old beauty queen slang. In 2003, the UN Security Council approved a resolution expanding NATO-led peacekeeping force in Afghanistan. In 2007, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, after a meeting with human rights activists in Moscow, told reporters the Russian government under Vladimir Putin had amassed so much central authority that the power grab could undermine its commitment to democracy. In 2011, Raj, the hedge fund billionaire at the center of one of the biggest insider trading cases in U.S. history, was sentenced by a federal judge in New York to 11 years behind bars. In 2016, Bob Dole was named winner of the Nobel Prize in Bob Dylan was named winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. Bob Dole would be interested to know he won a prize in 2016 after he'd been dead for a while. In 2017, President Donald Trump accused Iran of violating the 2015 nuclear accord, but did not yet pull the U.S. out of the deal or reimpose nuclear sanctions. Trump would pull the U.S. out of the deal the following May and restore harsh sanctions. In 2021, U.S. officials said they would reopen land borders to non-essential travel starting in November, ending 19-month freeze because of the coronavirus pandemic. All right. So that ends this, and that's going to end this. I think I've done enough of these, and I'm not actually going to get a job on the radio. That was just wishful thinking and them being nice to a crippled guy. So I think I'm going to stop doing these things. No one really cares anyway. This was just for me. So that will be it. Goodbye, YouTube.